The fluorescent lights of the bullpen hummed with a sterile, predatory energy. It was 7:15 a.m., and the young lions were already prowling. Jackson Miller led the pack, his Italian leather loafers clicking against the marble floor with the rhythmic arrogance of a man who owned the air everyone else breathed. He stopped at the edge of the intern pool, his shadow falling over Leo's desk, a cramped, corner laminate slab piled high with redundant spreadsheets. Leo didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on a secondary monitor, a small, cracked screen tucked behind a stack of manila folders. To any passerby, it looked like he was struggling with a basic data entry task. In reality, Leo was watching a packet sniffer trace a backdoor encryption originating from the firm's server room. The digital signature was unmistakable, the Cully Syndicate. The mafia was inside the firm's firewall, and they were looking for the general's daughter. Vance. Look at me when I'm exerting the effort to acknowledge you. Jackson's voice cut through the hum of the office like a blunt blade. Leo slowly shifted his gaze. He kept his expression vacant, his eyes slightly glazed, the mask of the invisible man. It was a face he had worn in insurgent camps and high-stakes poker games from Macau to Marseille. Jackson sneered, reaching out to snag the collar of Leo's shirt between two fingers. Look at this fabric. Is this polyester, Leo? It looks like something you'd use to wipe down a windshield. We have a dress code here. This is a sanctuary of excellence, not a bus station. A few of the junior associates paused their typing to snicker. Leo felt the familiar heat of the noise, the chaotic, ego-driven static of corporate life. He could have ended Jackson in 3 seconds. He knew the exact pressure point behind Jackson's ear that would put him on the floor, and he knew enough about Jackson's offshore consulting fees to ruin his life by noon. Instead, Leo forced a stammer. I thought the work was more important than the shirt, Mr. Miller. Jackson's face turned a shade of bruised purple. The work? You call failing to categorize the quarterly projections work? You're a ghost, Vance. You're a rounding error. You dress like a failure because you are one. If I see you in this thrift store rag tomorrow, don't bother swiping your badge. Jackson dropped the collar with a look of physical disgust, wiping his fingers on his silk pocket square as he turned to hold court with the other managers. They laughed, a chorus of barking, expensive sounds that filled the open concept office. Leo returned his gaze to the cracked monitor. The data packet had just moved. The leak wasn't coming from a remote hack, it was being triggered by a physical hardware key inside the building. He felt the cold, familiar thrill of the hunt settle in his chest. He didn't care about the polyester shirt or the ridicule. He was the architect, and the building was already compromised. He watched the reflection of the elites in his darkened screen, men who thought they were at the top of the food chain, completely unaware that the wolf was already among them, and he was the only thing standing between them and the slaughter to come. Leo reached into his pocket and felt the cold steel of a specialized thumb drive. He didn't need a suit to do his job. He just needed Jackson to keep looking down on him long enough to finish the trace. The morning air in the office grew thick with the scent of overpriced Arabica and the palpable tension of a looming deadline. On his secondary screen, the red blinking cursor of the packet sniffer was no longer just tracing, it was screaming. The hardware key had been activated in the north stairwell, a blind spot in the building's outdated security grid. Leo's fingers danced across the keys with a silent, fluid grace that contradicted his slumped posture. He had 45 seconds to intercept the handshake before the Mafia's ghost program masked the general's daughter's location permanently. Vance. The bark was closer this time. Jackson Miller stood at the edge of the cubicle, flanked by two senior VPs who looked like they had been carved out of the same block of arrogance. Jackson held a gold-rimmed credit card between two fingers like a trophy. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. I need 4 triple-shot macchiatos, 2 decaf lattes, and a tray of those artisanal biscotti from the place 3 blocks over. Move. Leo didn't look up. His eyes were narrowed, tracking a string of hexadecimal code that was his only link to the threat. "I can't right now, Mr. Miller. I'm in the middle of a critical sync." The bullpen went silent. The sound of clicking keyboards died an abrupt death. Jackson stepped into Leo's personal space, the smell of his minty breath clashing with the metallic tang of the server cooling fans. "A critical sync? You're an intern, Leo. Your most critical function is acting as a glorified delivery boy." "I didn't ask. I commanded." 10 seconds, Leo whispered to himself, his pulse steady at 60 beats per minute. If he left the terminal now, the Cully Syndicate would have a direct line into the General's secure home network. "What did you say to me?" Jackson leaned down, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hiss. "You're refusing a direct order from the man who signs your pittance of a paycheck." "I'm busy," Leo said, his voice flat and devoid of the intern stutter he usually feigned. He finally looked up, his gaze meeting Jackson's. For a fleeting second, the predatory steel in Leo's eyes made Jackson flinch, a primal instinct warning the bully that he was poking a landmine. But the moment passed, and Jackson's ego surged back to fill the gap. He reached out and violently slammed Leo's laptop shut, the plastic casing groaning under the force. The screen went black. The connection severed. The trace was lost. Leo sat perfectly still. That noise in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. He had failed the silent mission because of a coffee run. "That's it," Jackson spat, tossing the credit card onto Leo's keyboard. "I've tried to mentor you. I've tried to give you a chance despite your incompetence and your pathetic lack of professional decorum. But you're a liability. You're arrogant, you're lazy, and quite frankly, you're a stain on this firm's reputation." Jackson turned to the office at large, raising his voice so every lion in the room could witness the kill. "Leo Vance, you are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, but honestly, I don't want to waste their time. Take your polyester rags and get out before I have you charged with trespassing." A ripple of mocking laughter traveled through the room. The VPs shook their heads in faux disappointment. Leo stood up slowly. He didn't grab his coat. He didn't reach for the credit card. He simply looked at the dark laptop, then at the clock. In 12 minutes, the general would arrive for a high-level briefing he thought was secure. In 13 minutes, the building would no longer belong to the suits. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Leo said quietly. He tucked the specialized thumb drive into his pocket and walked toward the elevator, his steps light and purposeful. Jackson laughed, calling out to his back, "Don't forget to check the classifieds for janitorial work, Vance. It's more your speed." Leo didn't look back. He was no longer an intern, and he was no longer bound by the rules of the corporate world. The architect was back on the clock. The lobby of Miller and Associates had never felt more like a stage. Jackson Miller was still riding the high of the execution, leaning against a mahogany reception desk and regaling a group of associates with a dramatized version of Leo's firing. He was mid-sentence, mocking the dead-eyed stare of the former intern, when the heavy glass revolving doors didn't just turn, they seemed to surrender. The air in the room changed instantly. It wasn't the arrival of a client. It was the arrival of a force of nature. For men in charcoal tactical suits moved in first, their eyes scanning the mezzanine with a professional hunger that made the firm's private security look like mall cops. Then came the boots. The rhythmic, heavy strike of spit-shined leather on marble echoed like a drumbeat. General Marcus Thorne, a man whose chest was a tapestry of ribbons and whose face was etched from the granite of a dozen battlefields, stormed into the center of the lobby. The 4 stars on his shoulders caught the overhead lights, casting a cold, metallic glare. The young lions froze. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by the frantic, shallow breathing of men who realized they were suddenly very small. From the executive elevator, the CEO, Robert Miller, practically tumbled out. He was fumbling with his silk tie, his face a mask of panicked sycophancy. "General Thorne. We weren't expecting you for another 20 minutes. Please, come this way to the conference suite. We have the premium catering ready, and I've personally reviewed the security protocols." The general didn't stop. He didn't even look at Robert. He moved through the sea of suits like a battleship cutting through driftwood. "Where is he?" Thorne's voice was a low growl that vibrated in the floorboards. "Sir." Robert stammered, scurrying to keep pace with the general's long strides. "The board is all present. Jackson here, my top senior VP, has been managing the—" "I don't care about your board, and I don't care about your VPs," Thorne snapped, stopping so abruptly that Jackson Miller nearly bumped into his metals. The general turned his piercing, icy gaze onto Jackson, who stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open in a silent, comical "Oh, I am looking for the architect." Jackson blinked, his brain failing to process the term. The architect? "Sir, we don't have anyone by that name. We're a financial firm. If you're looking for the structural blueprints of the building, I'm looking for the man who saved a carrier strike group while you were learning how to overcharge for interest rates," the general barked. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the elevator bank where Leo Vance stood, his hand on the sensor, his posture still slumped in that deceptive, incompetent slouch. The CEO laughed nervously, trying to regain control of the room. "General, there must be a misunderstanding. The only person over there is a former intern we just let go. A bit of a liability, really. Total incompetence. He was just leaving." The general's jaw set. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. He looked at Robert, then at Jackson, with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You fired him?" Thorne asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "For cause, sir." Jackson piped up, desperate to prove his utility. He refused a direct order. "Couldn't even manage a coffee run. We have standards here, and he just didn't fit the—" General Thorne didn't let him finish. He turned away from the elites, as if they had ceased to exist. He began walking toward the elevator, toward the invisible man, in the wrinkled white shirt. The entire office held its breath, waiting for the general to tear the intern apart for trespassing in the presence of greatness. The silence in the lobby was no longer the silence of an office, it was the vacuum of a tomb. Hundreds of employees stood paralyzed, their phones halfway to their ears, their coffee cups forgotten, as General Marcus Thorne, a man who answered only to the President and God, approached the failed intern. Leo didn't move. He stood by the elevator, his thumb drive clutched in a fist, looking every bit the discarded employee. Jackson Miller took a step forward, a smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. He expected a reprimand. He expected the general to demand security haul the trash out of his sight. "Vance." Jackson called out, his voice cracking with a desperate need to stay relevant. "The general is speaking to you. Stand at attention, you idiot. This is the last time you'll ever be in the presence of a real—" The general stopped 3 paces from Leo. Then, the world tilted. General Thorne, a man whose spine was rumored to be made of reinforced steel, didn't shout. He didn't arrest. Slowly, with a deliberate, haunting reverence, he lowered his head. He bent at the waist, his eyes finding the floor, performing a deep, formal bow that spoke of a debt that could never be repaid in currency. "Sir," the general said, his voice thick with a level of respect that made the CEO's groveling look like a cheap performance. "The situation has deteriorated. The encryption we discussed, the leak has gone live. We are blind, and the asset is in play. I am officially requesting your reactivation. The architect is needed." The sound of a dropped glass shattered the silence. It was Robert Miller, the CEO, whose hand had gone limp. Jackson Miller looked like he was having a stroke, his face transitioned from arrogant red to a ghostly, translucent white. You're bowing. Jackson whispered, the words slipping out before his brain could stop them. General, that's Leo. He's a nobody. He's the guy who messed up the spreadsheet for the merger. He's the guy who couldn't get the coffee right. Thorne straightened up, turning his head just enough to catch Jackson in his periphery. The look was so cold it seemed to drop the room's temperature by 10 degrees. This man, Thorne said, his voice a low, vibrating growl, has spent the last 3 years in a self-imposed exile, trying to give people like you a world quiet enough to play your little money games in. While you were complaining about his incompetence, he was likely the only reason your servers weren't gutted by foreign intelligence 6 months ago. The general looked back at Leo, his expression softening into one of urgent plea. Architect, please. My daughter is on that transport. The signal went dark 3 minutes ago. Leo finally exhaled. The invisible man mask didn't just slip, it evaporated. He stood taller, his shoulders squaring as years of tactical weight returned to his frame. The vacant look in his eyes was replaced by a terrifying, predatory focus, the look of a man who saw the world as a series of vectors and kill zones. The signal didn't go dark, Marcus, Leo said. His voice was no longer flat, it was the voice of a commander. They didn't cut the line. They hijacked the node in the north stairwell of this very building. You didn't come here for a meeting. You came here because this is the extraction point. Leo stepped toward the general, ignoring the sea of suits who were now shrinking back, terrified of the man they had mocked only minutes prior. He reached out and took the encrypted tablet from the general's aide. Jackson, Leo said without looking back. Jackson flinched as if he'd been struck. Why yes. You wanted to know why I didn't get your coffee. Leo's fingers were already flying across the tablet, bypassing military-grade firewalls in seconds. It's because I was busy tracking the men currently entering your basement with suppressed submachine guns. You're not fired, Jackson. You're just irrelevant. Leo looked at the general. Lock the building down. Now. The transition was instantaneous. One moment, the lobby was a theater of corporate humiliation, the next, it became a kill zone. The heavy, reinforced glass of the north entrance didn't shatter, it dissolved under the rhythmic thud of breaching charges. Down. Everyone on the floor. General Thorne roared, his voice cutting through the sudden, high-pitched scream of the office staff. The young lions, who had spent the morning puffing their chests now collapsed like wet paper. Jackson Miller dove under a reception desk, his $2,000 suit catching on a drawer, his face pressed into the carpet in a mask of primal terror. The CEO stood frozen, a statue of uselessness, as 4 shadows drifted through the smoke of the blast. These weren't street thugs. They moved with the synchronized, predatory grace of high-tier professionals. They wore matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by ballistic masks, and their weapons were short-barreled suppressors that looked like extensions of their own limbs. Check the manifest, the lead enforcer barked, his voice distorted by a comms link. The girl is in the VIP lounge. Secure the general, neutralize the guards. If the architect is on site, kill him on site. Frank Cullen had sent his best. They knew the layout. They knew the timing. They just didn't know that the man they were ordered to kill was already 10 steps ahead of them. While the general's detail moved to form a defensive perimeter around Thorne, Leo didn't seek cover. He moved with a terrifying, ghost-like efficiency toward the security hub behind the main desk. He didn't run, he flowed, staying below the line of sight provided by the heavy marble counters. Marcus, they aren't here for you, Leo said into the general's ear as he passed him, his voice a calm anchor in the rising tide of chaos. The general's daughter isn't in the lounge. I moved her to the service elevator 3 minutes ago when the packet sniffer spiked. They're chasing a ghost. A burst of suppressed fire chipped the marble inches above Jackson Miller's head. The bully let out a pathetic, whimpering sob, curling into a fetal ball. The hitmen were fan out, their boots heavy on the floor where Leo had stood moments before. "Where is she?" the lead hitman snarled, grabbing Robert Miller by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "The girl. Now. I don't know. I don't know anything," the CEO shrieked, his dignity evaporating with every shake of the enforcer's hand. From the shadows of the security alcove, Leo's eyes went cold. He reached for the building's master control panel. To the hitmen, this was an office building, a cage of glass and steel. To Leo, it was a weapon. He didn't have a rifle, but he had the building's nervous system under his thumb. The hitmen began to move toward the lounge, their weapons raised, their focus narrowed on the prize. They were so confident in their violence that they didn't notice the magnetic locks on the heavy fire doors beginning to hum. They didn't notice the HVAC system shifting into high-pressure mode. Leo looked at the monitors, watching the red dots of the hitmen move into position. "Cully sent wolves to a den," Leo whispered, his finger hovering over the lockdown command. But he forgot who designed the trap. With a single, sharp keystroke, the heavy steel shutters of the lobby began to scream as they descended, sealing the young lions, the general, and the assassins into a dark, pressurized arena. The hunt had officially begun. The heavy steel shutters hit the marble floor with a final, echoing thud, sealing the lobby in a tomb of shadows and emergency red lighting. The young lions were no longer men, they were a cacophony of panicked breathing and muffled sobs. In the center of the darkness, the hitmen hesitated, their night vision goggles whining as they adjusted to the sudden gloom. "Status," the lead enforcer hissed into his comms. The architect, Leo's voice drifted through the building's intercom system, disjointed and haunting. "He's closing the door, boys." Leo wasn't in the security hub anymore. He was moving through the janitorial corridors behind the drywall, the invisible veins of the building that the suits never deigned to notice. He burst into a supply closet, his movements a blur of surgical precision. He didn't reach for a gun. He grabbed a heavy-duty canister of industrial floor wax, a roll of high-tensile strength wire, and a stack of pressurized CO2 canisters used for the lobby's soda fountains. In the lobby, Jackson Miller tried to crawl toward a side exit, but a hand caught his collar and hauled him back. It was Leo. "Stay down, Jackson. If you move, you die," Leo commanded. The authority in his voice was so absolute that Jackson stopped trembling and simply stared, paralyzed by the transformation of the man he had ridiculed. Leo didn't stay to comfort him. He was already stringing the high-tensile wire across the north corridor at ankle height, hidden by the swirling mist of the HVAC system's emergency purge. He appended the industrial wax across the polished marble of the main choke point, creating a frictionless kill zone that transformed the elegant lobby into a skating rink of death. "General, get your men to the mezzanine," Leo whispered into a handheld radio he'd liberated from a fallen guard. "I'm funneling them toward the server wing. Use the shadows. They expect a firefight, give them a labyrinth." Thorne, seeing the tactical genius unfolding, signaled his men. "Move. Follow the architect's lead." The hitmen recovered their footing and began to push toward the VIP lounge, their heavy boots thumping rhythmically. They rounded the corner into the north corridor, their eyes locked on their thermal optics. They didn't see the wire. The lead enforcer's foot caught the line. He went down hard, his tactical vest clattering against the floor. As he tried to push himself up, his hands slipped on the industrial wax. He slid helplessly, his momentum carrying him directly into the path of a pressurized CO2 canister Leo had rigged to a motion sensor. Pieth boom. The canister didn't explode with fire, but with a violent, freezing burst of pressure that sent the hitman spiraling into a marble pillar. The sound was a dull roar in the confined space. "He's using the building against us," one of the hitmen shouted, his professional veneer cracking. "We have no traction. We can't find a line of sight." From the shadows of a janitorial cart, Leo watched them struggle. He had spent months being treated like the dirt on these floors. Now, the very tools used to clean that dirt were dismantling a $1 million hit squad. He looked at his watch. The general's daughter was safe in the service elevator, but the second wave was breaching the server room. Leo grabbed a heavy mop handle and snapped it into 2 jagged stakes. He didn't look like an intern anymore. He looked like the man who had designed the very concept of asymmetric warfare. "Jackson," Leo called out quietly into the darkness toward the desk. "You said I should look into janitorial work. You were right. It's a lot easier to take out the trash when you know where the bins are." The air in the server wing was a frigid, humming vacuum, a stark contrast to the stifling panic of the lobby below. Rows of black monoliths blinked with thousands of blue and green eyes, processing the millions of dollars the young lions obsessed over. To the 3 hitmen breaching the reinforced glass doors, this was just a room full of expensive metal. To Leo, it was a pressurized engine waiting for a spark. Leo stood at the master environmental console in the shadows of the rear rack. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the enforcers through their tactical masks. They moved in a diamond formation, their suppressed rifles sweeping the aisles with mechanical precision. "Check the floor for wires," the leader hissed. "The architect likes his toys." "He's out of floor wax up here," another replied, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and growing honor. "Let's just pull the drives and find the girl's tracking frequency." Leo watched them on the thermal bypass screen. He didn't have a weapon, but he had his hand on the building's circulatory system. With a silent sequence of keystrokes, he overrode the safety protocols for the FM-200 fire suppression system and the liquid nitrogen cooling loops. "You're looking for the heartbeat of the building," Leo's voice echoed, not from the intercom this time, but from the very speakers of the servers themselves, distorted and omnipresent. "But you're standing in the lungs." The lead hitman spun around, firing a blind burst of 3 rounds into a stack of empty cooling fans. "Show yourself." "I've been here the whole time," Leo whispered. "You just didn't think I was worth noticing." Leo slammed the enter key. A high-pitched scream of rushing gas filled the room as the FM-200 fire suppressant discharged. The oxygen level in the room plummeted instantly, designed to choke out a fire before it could touch the data. The hitmen gasped, their hands flying to their throats as the thin air turned into a chemical fog. Simultaneously, Leo triggered the emergency bypass on the sub-zero cooling lines. The floor-level vents groaned, vomiting a white, freezing mist of liquid nitrogen that crept across the floor like a physical tide. The hitmen scrambled backward, but the floor was already a sheet of dry ice. One enforcer slipped, his knee hitting the floor with a sickening crack as the extreme cold made the carbon fiber plating of his gear turn brittle as glass. "I can't breathe." The leader wheezed, his tactical mask useless against a vacuum. He tried to aim his rifle at the console, but his fingers were already losing sensation, the sub-zero mist leaching the heat from his body. Leo stepped out from behind the rack, his face calm, his breathing steady because he was standing in the one small pocket of air he had diverted through the HVAC manual override. He looked down at the enforcer who had been sent to neutralize him. The man looked like a stranded deep-sea diver, gasping for a life that was being systematically withdrawn. "Tell Cully the architect doesn't hide in buildings," Leo said, his voice cold and resonant in the fog. "He becomes them." Leo didn't wait for a response. He grabbed the lead hitman's discarded radio and adjusted the frequency. Through the static, he heard a new sound, the sound of a child crying. Rosie. The general's daughter. The second wave hadn't gone for the servers, they had found the service elevator override in the daycare center on the 4th floor. The coldness in Leo's chest deepened. The traps were over. Now, it was personal. The 4th floor was a surreal graveyard of innocence. Primary colors and plush carpets were bathed in the strobing crimson of the emergency lights. In the center of the corporate daycare, surrounded by plastic building blocks and miniature chairs, stood Frank Cullen's lead enforcer, a mountain of a man known only as Vane. He held a sobbing 6-year-old girl by the arm, his gloved hand a terrifying contrast to the pink lace of her sleeve. "Quiet, Rosie," Vane growled, his voice muffled by a thick ballistic veil. "Your father is a very busy man. We're just going to help him retire early." Leo stepped through the shattered glass of the daycare entrance. He wasn't hiding anymore. He didn't have the invisible man slouch or the intern stutter. He walked with a heavy, predatory grace, his knuckles white as he gripped a heavy, industrial-grade stapler and a length of braided steel cable salvaged from the server room. Vane spun around, hoisting Rosie like a shield. "The architect. I heard you were a ghost. You look like a man who's about to lose his job and his life on the same day." "Let the girl go, Vane," Leo said. His voice was a flat, terrifying vibration. "This isn't a server room. There are no traps here. Just me." Vane laughed, a wet, metallic sound. He shoved Rosie into a corner playhouse, the plastic walls rattling as she curled into a ball. "Good. I was getting tired of the magic tricks." The enforcer lunged. He didn't reach for his sidearm, he wanted to break the man who had embarrassed his team. He swung a haymaker that would have shattered a concrete pillar. Leo didn't block it, he evaporated. He moved inside the arc of the punch, his body a blur of economy and violence. He drove the heavy stapler into the soft meat of Vane's thigh with a mechanical thud click, the long steel staples anchoring the man's tactical trousers to his own skin. Vane roared in pain, swinging a backhand that caught Leo in the ribs. Leo took the hit, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp hiss, but he didn't retreat. He used the momentum to whip the steel cable around Vane's throat. The brawl was primitive and silent, punctuated only by the scuff of boots on foam playmats. They crashed through a table of finger paints, splattering the floor in a mock bloodshed of yellow and blue. Vane was stronger, a beast of pure muscle, but Leo was a surgeon. Every strike Leo landed was calculated to disable a joint or sever a breath. Leo ducked a desperate lunge and drove his elbow into the base of Vane's skull. As the giant staggered, Leo wrapped the cable around a structural pillar, using the enforcer's own weight as a pulley. With a final, guttural heave, Leo slammed the giant face first into the wall of achievement, where the employees' children hung their drawings. Vane slumped to the floor, unconscious, his head resting beneath a finger-painted sun. Leo didn't check the body. He turned toward the playhouse. The predatory fire in his eyes vanished, replaced by a soft, weary warmth. He knelt on the floor, ignoring the blood blooming on his white shirt. "Rosie," he whispered. "Do you remember the man who used to bring your dad the magic folders?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide. "The invisible man?" Leo smiled, reaching out a hand. "Not anymore. Your dad is waiting downstairs. Let's get you home." As he lifted the girl, the sound of rotors thudded against the building's exterior. The extraction was here. The intern was gone, the architect had finished his final shift. The rhythmic thrum of the Black Hawk's rotors shook the very bones of the building, a mechanical heartbeat that signaled the end of the nightmare. On the roof, the cold morning air whipped Leo's torn white shirt against his skin. He stood with Rosie balanced on his hip, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. Below them, the lobby was being swarmed by federal agents, but up here, the world felt vast and silent. The heavy bay door of the helicopter slid open, and General Thorne stepped out before the skids had even settled. He didn't look at the tactical team fast roping onto the roof, he looked only at his daughter. As Leo handed her over, the general's composure, the legendary Granite Thorne, cracked just enough for a single, shaky breath of relief. "You're a damn ghost, Vance," Thorne said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. He looked at Leo's bloodied knuckles and the calm, hollow stare of a man who had walked through hell and come out the other side without breaking a sweat. "I'm not letting you go back to the shadows. I've got a seat waiting for you at the Pentagon. Director of Strategic Response. No more suits, no more lattes. You'd answer directly to me. Leo looked out over the city skyline. That noise of the corporate world felt a lifetime away. I'll think about it, Marcus. But right now, I have some unfinished business on the 42nd floor. Leo didn't wait for the helicopter to lift. He turned and walked back into the stairwell, descending into the ruins of Miller and Associates. The bullpen was a disaster zone. Employees were being interviewed by FBI agents, and the young lions were huddled in the corner, their bravado replaced by the ashen paleness of the truly terrified. In the center of the room, Jackson Miller was arguing with a suit-clad investigator. "I'm telling you, I'm the victim here," Jackson shouted, his voice high and shrill. "That intern, Vance, he probably set the whole thing up. He was incompetent, a total liability." "Actually, Mr. Miller," the agent interrupted, holding up a sleek, black tablet. "We've been reviewing the internal server logs Mr. Vance recovered during the lockdown. It seems the Mafia's hardware key didn't just appear. It was authorized by your personal credentials. And those consulting fees from the Cully Syndicate? We found the offshore routing in your private drive." Jackson's jaw dropped. He turned, desperate, only to see Leo standing 10 feet away. Leo wasn't slouching. He wasn't hiding. He looked at Jackson with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. "Leo. Tell them." Jackson scrambled toward him, reaching out to grab Leo's arm. "Tell them it was a mistake. You're the one who failed the security sync, remember? You're the incompetent one." Leo stepped back, letting Jackson's hand grasp empty air. "I didn't fail the sync, Jackson. I delayed it so the FBI could trace the origin of your login. You wanted me to fetch you coffee so I'd be away from the terminal when the final transfer went through. You weren't just a bully. You were the leak." As the agents moved in to cuff Jackson, the CEO, Robert Miller, stepped forward, his face a mask of desperate damage control. "Leo, Mr. Vance. Clearly, there's been a massive misunderstanding. We'd like to offer you Jackson's position. Senior VP. Full partnership. A corner office and—" Leo didn't even let him finish. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his mangled ID badge, and dropped it onto the CEO's expensive mahogany desk. "Keep the office, Robert," Leo said, his voice low and final. "I've spent 3 years being invisible to people like you. It turns out, the view is much better from the top." Leo walked out of the glass doors, leaving the sea of suits behind. Outside, the city was waking up, oblivious to the war that had been fought in its shadows. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "This is the architect," he said. "Tell the general I'll take the job. But I'm choosing my own shirt."